Meanwhile, a federal judge in Texas has declared that the remaining registration scheme for short-barreled rifles and suppressors in the National Firearms Act is unconstitutional. This is the latest in a series of regulatory issues that have been challenged in the courts, with Second Amendment advocates getting their way. To delve further into this and what it means now and into the future, let's talk with Kostas Moros, Director of Legal Research and Education for the Second Amendment Foundation. Kostas, thanks for taking time with us. Good to see you again. How significant is this issue about the registration for gun owners?
It's extremely significant, but from the start, I should say that it actually wasn't a Second Amendment win, because although in our case we made a Second Amendment claim, our first argument was on the taxing power, because our argument basically went that when the National Firearms Act was passed, Congress explicitly said this was a tax measure. You had to register your guns only insofar as it was necessary to prove you paid the $200 transfer tax. So when Congress last year eliminated the tax as to suppressors, short barrel rifles, and short barrel shotguns, there was no grounds to keep the registration requirement. You can't, if you're going to base this power on the power to tax, on Congress's power to tax, you can't then also require registration once the tax no longer exists. And the judge agreed with us and struck down the registration scheme on those grounds.
Now, what exactly was involved in that registration? Before, the One Big Beautiful Bill had this measure that was essentially striking out that fee that gun owners would have to pay if they wanted to register a short-barreled rifle or a short-barreled shotgun, or suppressors, which are also known as silencers. What was that process like? They had to give a form to the federal government and then pay the fee?
Yeah, so it was a $200 tax per transfer, and it would essentially be a form that you would fill out, an extra background check in essence. But the biggest burden was, of course, the wait times, because it could take, especially in the pre-digital age, 6 months, a year or more to get these items, these forms approved. So you'd have to wait that whole time before you could get your gun. But even so, even though it has sped up in recent years, thanks to digitization efforts, it would still be an extra registration requirement. And just to be clear, these things are still defined as firearms. So when you go now, even if this ruling is upheld, let's say it's upheld nationwide, you would still need your standard background check when buying these items. You just wouldn't need to register them anymore with the federal government.
And when it goes towards that, initial purchase, you got a background check, but this registration would have required a second background check for that one item?
In essence, yes, it would be a registration, and they would keep a record of it forever that you have this registered. Because remember, again, the point of it originally, at least ostensibly by Congress, was a way to make sure you paid the $200 tax. And the way they did that was through the registration. So again, without that tax existing, there was no reason to have the registration scheme anymore.
Kostas, obviously, this is just one district judge. As you hinted at, this could, be something that turns into a national situation. But what is the situation in that district? Is this now on hold for the plaintiffs in this case?
Yeah, so the judge stayed his ruling from the get-go for 7 days to give the federal government a chance to appeal. That's pretty normal. Judges will do that just to preserve the status quo for the time being. But assuming the ruling is upheld, or the stay does not go into effect, or the federal government does not appeal, this ruling would be limited to members of the associational plaintiffs. And although, just to add to this confusion, we're the Second Amendment Foundation and we help pay for this case, but we're actually a plaintiffs in a different case. So our sister organization is a plaintiff in this one. So basically, you want to be a member of our sister org, Citizens Committee, Firearms Policy Coalition, Gun Owners of America, one of those, and you would be you would benefit from this preliminary or this injunction, permanent injunction rather. We do think there's a pretty good chance we'll win this because it is in the Fifth Circuit, and the Fifth Circuit has already expressed skepticism in other contexts about both the taxing power and the federal government's other arguments around the Commerce Clause. From that point, it'll go to the Supreme Court, and we'll just have to see how it plays out.
So still some time before this ruling really kind of spreads across and impacts every gun owner out there that may want a short-barreled rifle or some kind of suppressor. But Kostas, if you can, respond to what some of the gun control advocates have had to say about this. You've got Giffords, for example, talking about how, it takes away a registration requirement and background check that they say is important to keep bad actors from having these firearms.
Well, look, Giffords, Everytown, all those groups, they predict the sky's going to fall anytime we get a court win, and it never does. They said Bruin would lead to blood in the streets, and instead we have the lowest homicide rate ever. So, no, this is not going to lead to more danger. These sorts of firearms were already very rarely used in crime, almost never. And again, the background check would still exist when you go to buy one. It isn't going to suddenly be a free-for-all on these items. What they want is the registration scheme because it's a future confiscation list, in my opinion. I think that's why they want it. In fact, Giffords was posting yesterday, I think it was Giffords, about how great this registration requirement is and how it protects us all. And yet in the states they have power over, like California or New York, these items are totally banned. That is their preference. They want total bans, Illinois too, rather than registration. If all they cared about was registration, then why aren't they calling on California and New York and so forth to lift their total bans and just have a registration scheme? So I don't think anyone should take their concerns seriously. You will still need a background check to buy these, and it isn't just going to be a free-for-all. All that goes away is the NFA's burdensome registration requirements.
Well, and then your reaction to, the next thing that they tend to say is this type of thing is just going to enrich the gun industry CEOs.
Well, that's not an argument. I mean, if there was a ruling defending, the right to publish books, nobody would say, oh, this is just going to enrich book publishers. I mean, maybe incidentally, but this is about the Second Amendment rights of individuals. The fact that some people might incidentally profit is not a reason to not respect constitutional rights.
Kostas, you've also talked a little bit about Section 926A and some modified rules that the ATF has. That window to make comments has closed. You've got critics like Democrats out of the U.S. Senate saying that the rule is too broad and could create some harms for communities that have stricter gun laws. Your thoughts on that rule concerning somebody traveling interstate with a firearm, as is their Second Amendment right?
Yeah, I was very upset reading that letter from those 4 senators this morning. And it was only 4, which is a little surprising that they couldn't get more to sign on to it. But their argument is basically that the Firearm Owners Protection Act, which was meant to protect firearm owners traveling through hostile states, as long as the guns they were traveling with were locked away out of arm's reach, and the guns are legal in their origin state and legal in their destination. They're basically saying if you stop for gas, if you have car trouble and need to replace a tire, if you have a medical emergency and need to go to the hospital, if you have an unexpected layover at an airport, all those things should not be protected, and you should be able to be arrested for that stop. That can't have been what Congress meant when they passed the Firearms Owners Protection Act. So we hope that the ATF will not take that comment from those senators seriously and go forward with its proposed rule to protect gun owners while they are lawfully traveling through various states.
Well, Kostas, we've got obviously a lot more to talk about in the future, especially as we gear up for what's going to happen at the U.S. Supreme Court concerning bans on certain semi-automatic firearms and magazines over certain capacities. So we'll definitely have to talk with you again in the near future about that case and many others that are happening all across the country. Kostas Morris, Director of Legal Research and Education for the Second Amendment Foundation. Greatly appreciate your time.